Hey Dan, what's that noise? Oh, that's just subframe bushings. Bam, 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 thud, thud. Yep, that's subframe bushings. Are you sure? It just might be your roof rack that's rattling around. Nope, it's subframe bushings. So while I have it down, I might as well do rear trailing arm bushings as well. Aside from all the loud noises subframe bushings make when they're bad, you can also check how much flex they have in them by putting a jack underneath the subframe like I did here. Now, it only moves it ever so slightly, but in that ever so slightly movement, that's the rattle that you hear. And one way to test this is by putting a jack underneath the subframe and then jacking it up and seeing how much play is in that little subframe bushing right there. Begin by jacking up your car. You want to use 4 jack stands on this, not only to evenly distribute the weight, but it also will make it a lot easier to crawl underneath when you need to do certain components to this, because this is probably one of the biggest jobs on the E30 to do. And once you're done with it, you're going to feel so satisfied because it feels so much better without bad subframe bushings and without bad rear trailing arm bushings. Anyway, so jack up all 4 points of the car and use jack stands. I can't stress that enough. Use them. Once the car is up in the air on all 4 points, check your jacking points. I put mine right before, right there, and the 2 on the front part of the frame. So that's probably the best jacking points for this installation. Don't do it any further back, especially where the subframe bushings are, because you're never going to be able to take the subframe out when you need to eventually lower it down. And then take off your wheels. I'd recommend marking which ones came from where, so you know when you put it back on that you'll have the same tires on the same spot as you did before. Now get underneath the car and spray paint right where the joint between the drive shaft and the differential is, so when you put it back together, you know exactly how the differential and drive shaft met up before. With the wheels off and the drive shaft marked, you now want to loosen the 2 bolts and clamps that hold on the back muffler, and I'd recommend it makes it a lot easier to take these off if you have them sprayed down with WD-40 or penetrating oil. Now separate the muffler from the catalytic converter. These are 4 13mm bolts and nuts, and they come off relatively easy. Now climb in the car and remove the rear seat. This is done easily by just putting your finger in between the carpet and the seat itself and just pull up. And there are 2 pins on either side of the seat that seat it in properly. And once you pull that up, the whole seat just comes out. And I also noticed on the test drive that my shifter bushings are really loose and worn out, so I'll be replacing those too. And that's in gear, and I know how much movement that there was in between there, and it looks like it's in neutral, right? But that's really in gear, that's in first gear. So that'll get replaced too, all those bushings in there, and watch out for the video for that. Back underneath the car, with the exhaust removed, you want to then move on to this under panel right here. And it's all held on by 10 and 13mm bolts. Just know which one came from where, and it's only held on with like 6 or 8 bolts. I'm missing a couple here and there, and I will replace them later on. But yeah, just remove those and take the whole panel down. Now for the fun part. Start to disconnect the sensors around the car. I would start with the ABS sensor in the back. Right here it's a 4mm bolt, and it turns off with an Allen head. With the bolt removed, I would get a pair of pliers like this. Don't squeeze too hard, but you just want to like wiggle it out of the hole. It's going to be really tight because it's been in there for such a long time, but it pulls out. Don't worry, it pulls like straight out just like that. And if you have a lot of crud on the top of the tip there, you can clean it off with a light duty paper towel or whatever. Don't go too hard on it, and don't scrub it or sand it with like a sandpaper or anything. You'll mess up the sensor. Now take the ABS sensor wires out of their clips on the trailing arms and subframe. It's kind of like tangled in a certain area, so just remember the way it goes. But it pulls out of these little clips, and then I would hang the sensor out of the way and out of the subframe, so when you lower it down, you don't rip up the sensor wire. With all the other sensors and lines disconnected, I would recommend next is to disconnect the brake line. And the brake line runs on the rear trailing arm, and they can get really stuck, as you just heard it pop like that. They get really stuck over time. However, you can get it out. Make sure that you use line wrenches here. Using a regular wrench on these lines, you'll strip them right out, and then you're kind of done for, and you've got to make new lines. So use the line wrenches. These are odd sizes on these. I think it's like a 9mm and a 11 or 12. Not something that's very typical on a BMW or a German car. But yeah, just take your time, and if they're really seized on there or they're really rusted out, replace as according. But I was able to use my original ones. And when they're all out, when you take the fitting apart, make sure you put like a catch pan or a drain pan or something underneath, because you don't want brake fluid to go on your floor, especially if it's painted. It'll take it right out, so it'll take the paint right off. So yeah, just be careful with brake fluid, especially also with car exteriors, because it'll take paint right off. And it's the same exact process for the other side. These can be a little tough, I will admit it. They're not that easy to take off, but believe me, you'll get it. Just use line wrenches. I can't stress that enough. And if you haven't already, you also want to disconnect the brake wear sensor for the brake pads. It's only on the right side caliper. I know it's a little tough to see here, and it's a little tough to move around, but it all snakes back up into the trailing arm with those little clips, and it gets pushed out of the way. Now for the emergency brake cables. The e-brake cables also run through the trailing arms and into the rear discs. They act a lot like a drum brake, where you have two shoes that expand out and then hold the disc from, or prevent it from rolling around. Now, when it comes to the emergency brake on E30s especially, they're kind of like a pain, and compared to newer model BMWs like E36, E39, E46, they're really just not that great compared to them. So my recommendation is to essentially gut the brakes first by taking off the caliper and its 7mm pins on the backside. There are two of them. With the caliper out of the way, you can then take out the caliper bracket, which is, I believe, two 17mm bolts hold that on. Now you can take that off. Then you take off the rotor with a 6mm, this 6mm set screw that holds the rotor on, and you can just slide the rotor off. And then from there, you can just watch how I disconnected all the brake parts. And yeah, again, it acts a lot like a drum brake. So if you're not uncertain of how to put it back together, my recommendation is to take a photo of how it went and take multiple photos of multiple angles and how it went back together, and that way you can follow a photo on exactly how it does go back together. But just take your time with this, but yeah, just gut the brakes, and that way you can pull the cable out of the backside. And if you haven't already, take off the 19mm bolt holding on the back shock, and you can leave the shock hanging there, so long as it's not in the way of when you drop the rear end. And I also made it easier myself by taking out the drive shaft. In the center, where the center support bearing is, there are two 13mm bolts that hold that in, and those come right out, and then you can let it drop from the center, and then you take it off of the front guibo that connects to the transmission,
And back when I had you paint that part where it meets the differential, you want to take off those 4 nuts that hold it on as well. Alright, with all the lines and everything else disconnected, you should be ready to start dropping the subframe. So, start loosening this big nut at the bottom of this cup right here, but still leave the nut spun on. What you're going to do is you're going to need to hit it with a hammer because they tend to freeze on with the rust and water that gets in them. So just get a big hammer or the back of an axe like I have because it's really flat and I didn't want to mash the head of the nut. And then you whack it like 100 billion times till the bolt decides to unfreeze. Also, if you climb in the car real quick, you might want to put something over this hole because you never know if the bolt goes shooting out of there. You don't want it to go hit the glass inside. I've never seen that happen, but it's possible that it could happen. So just smash on the bolt till it eventually decides to pop out. And here's what the bolt looks like when it eventually decides to pop out of its seeding of rust. And I forgot to mention, if you haven't done so already, you want to take out the sway bar, or take off the links. They are 13mm nuts, one on each side of the trailing arm, and they just simply undo. All you got to do is then just take the sway bar and push it out of the way. You don't need the sway bar all the way down. Next on the list to take off is the 6mm Allen bolts. There's 2 of these on these. They're like a little, I guess you could say like a pad that runs across into the body of the car and then hooks onto the rest of the subframe, along with that like cup that holds that nut in place. So yeah, just loosen the 2 bolts and you should be good. And the same thing goes on to the other side. Now with the front parts disconnected, the final bolt is the diff bolt right there on the bracket. And just a real quick hint, I forgot it, but make sure that you take off the speed sensor in the back of the diff, unplug it, because I left it plugged in, and you'll see when I go to lower down the entire subframe, the plug actually snaps in pieces. Somehow it still works, but one day I'll replace the plug itself and that'll fix it. But yeah, just take off these. It's a nut and a bolt. I think it's a 22mm or a 21mm, and they loosen up relatively easy. And normally they have a lot of grease on them anyway, so you shouldn't have to worry about it like freezing on or anything. The next part is to make sure that you also have a jack underneath it, because sometimes the subframes like to stick, and I'll show you what I mean by stick later. But sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, so you don't want to run the risk of loosening that and then all of a sudden the whole subframe comes flying down on you. Make sure you put a jack underneath the differential. I only had 1 jack at the time that I could use, so I kind of made do with what I had. If I had the right equipment, I would have had like a transmission jack, and that would have been the safer way to lower it down. But I used the jack, and it eventually got it down, but it was a little sketchy, I will say that. And then I loosened the jack and started to let the subframe fall. At that point, the entire subframe liked to stick into the body of the car, and so how to unstick it, I will show you that right now. So the subframe bushings are stuck in their holes that connect to the body. And as you can see here, I like almost destroyed the subframe bushing by like whacking it with a hammer and trying to cut it with all sorts of stuff. But eventually I found the trick to be a 5/8 bolt that you would put into the subframe hole like that. And then you crank it on as tight as it can go. So crank it on with the ratchet. I would recommend going tighter than you think until it's safe enough that it won't fall out. And it was really, really tight. Eventually it was worked in enough where I felt comfortable with it being worked in. And so now the next step is to step in the car, and you want to get like a long metal rod. And so what's happening right now is that metal rod is going through that hole down to the subframe bushing, and it's hitting on top of that bolt. And really what it's working like is like a slide hammer, if you've ever used one of those. And it's yanking and pulling down with gravitational force on the rear subframe. And hit it harder than you think, because it's pretty rusted on, at least for mine in my case. But I set up the camera on the outside of the car to show you what's going on and how it worked out. So just bear with me to set up the camera correctly. And soon enough I got it. So here it goes, and hop in the car and start pounding on the metal rod. And there it goes. It slid out of the hole of the car. And it kind of gets stuck. The rod gets stuck, so just wiggle it out and eventually you'll get it. But yeah, that's where the subframe sits. And you have to do that to both sides. And once you do, then everything's back together. You heard me curse right there because I didn't realize that the subframe is literally hanging out by a zip tie on the side. I don't know what happened in the factory or if it was somebody else, but they zip tied the side. So here I go cutting the zip tie. Watch your fingers. Subframe out. So there it is. It's all out of the car. And with the subframe out, I decided to first start with the rear trailing arms. They're a little bit easier to take out than subframe bushings. So start by taking off the rear trailing arms. They can be a little tight, so yeah, just spray down with some silicone spray or penetrating oil or WD-40, whatever you prefer. And they should come out relatively easy though. The old bushings, you gotta watch. They may not look bad, but I'll tell you, while you have it down, you might as well replace, because these bushings, they're a real pain to do if you're just gonna take these down, if you're gonna take the whole subframe down just to do rear trailing arm bushings. You might as well do subframe bushings, trailing arm bushings, and even if you want to, a differential bushing, because believe me, it's not worth it to put this back in and then say, oh crap, one's gone bad and I didn't replace one, so pull it back out. It's not worth it, believe me, by any note. You want to do this once and never have to do it again. Now, what to do with the old bushings? Well, you come to this point here, you have the whole thing out, and you don't have access to a press, and more or less, you really can't do this like this with a press. So what I did was I put it on a dolly, so I could easily slide around the subframe. You only need like a simple mover's dolly, and then you use fire. And be very, very careful with this, because you don't want to burn down your garage, you don't want to burn down your house, you don't want to blow up your car, or anything like that. Just take it outside, well-ventilated area, and do not breathe in this rubber smoke, because this stuff is toxic. I'll tell you that right now. It is toxic as toxic comes. And it also stinks and smells like crap, but just torch it down, get it nice and hot, get it, melted and scalded, and get out, the old rubber from the bushing. So just leave your propane torch sitting on it for a long time, or a little while at least, and let fire do its work. And if you want to, you can start picking at it with a screwdriver. Don't use a nice screwdriver, use a really crappy, maybe Harbor Freight one, and watch fires as I did there. Because this dolly is not the greatest, and it also has fabric on it. So this hot rubber decides to start little fires on that fabric. So just be very, very careful with this fire stage. Don't do it near any trees or leaves. Just be careful. Eventually the bushing is going to start looking like this if you let the torch sit on it for a good 10 minutes. And yes, start picking all the vulcanized rubber out of there, or scalded rubber, whatever you want to call it. And it makes a big mess, so be prepared to clean up a big mess. Once the bushing is hot enough and the rubber is, kind of moved around it and pushed out of the way, you can then get a pair of pliers. And again, don't use a great pair of pliers, because this burnt rubber makes a complete mess. use an old crappy pair of pliers or something sitting around, whatever, and start to pull out the center part of the bushing, which is the metal part that sleeves the bolt on it. And once you use that, you can start twisting it out like so. And once you put your torch over to the side, and you can start twisting out the center sleeve like this, and the whole thing just slides right out like that. And yes, put out the fire, extinguish the flames, don't breathe the smoke. That's my best recommendation. Once you've got out all 4 rear trailing arm bushings, the right and left side, it's a good idea, once this is cool, don't touch this when it's hot, but when it's cool, clean it out with some brake clean or whatever, and a paper towel, and just clean out the sleeve. It'll help you press in the new bushings. And just like you did rear trailing arm bushings, you do the same thing to subframe bushings. And if you notice there, I left the bolt in the bottom of the subframe bushing, and trust me on this one, it'll make it that much easier to pull this subframe bushing out. Now, you see here, I kind of let it sit there, and it's torching it away, making a big mess, and these, I will warn you, will take you a little bit longer. It's probably 20 or 30 minutes per bushing to burn it out. And I'm using some accelerator here, very dangerous, and don't do it if you're not comfortable, but I was spraying it down with WD-40 just to keep the fire burning. It was a cold winter night, that was a little windy here and there, so yeah, I mean, just work at your own pace. And you see here, I take the wrench that I have, and I start to spin that bolt. Well, what that creates is the whole bushing starts to spin, and eventually it spins out of the subframe hole. And here's how I got out the old bushing after letting the torch set on it for about 30 minutes. And with the bushing center out, let the flame burn out the rest of the rubber that's left inside the subframe hole. And just like you did the trailing arm bushing holes, you want to do the same thing to the subframe bushing holes. Just clean it out. You don't need to go crazy. But yeah, just clean out all the crap that's inside or any other dust that's left over. I kind of went overkill with a wire brush. You really don't have to do that. And hopefully you saved the old bushing, because you're going to need to keep this top hat that's on it. If you see right here, it's got like a big washer on it. And I like to use the original stuff, so I just used my old one that was on this bushing. You can always buy new, but recycle with your old stuff. So clamp it down in a vise, and then hit, you can really tighten down the vise that way, and then hit that washer off the bushing. It'll take a little bit of back and forth finagling and messing around, but eventually it'll hit off the bushing. Just like that. Now to press in your new bushings. My recommendation is to freeze the bushings for a little while and get the rubber to contract and make it a little bit smaller. But yeah, so once they're frozen, then you want to get some white lithium grease or soapy water or anything of your choice, but anything that's like a lubricant that'll stay onto the bushing when you press it in. And then take it and make sure it's facing the right way. The pointed end goes towards the differential, and like the more knobby rounded edge goes towards the back end, towards the brakes and rotors. Now, I used a big C-clamp when I was pressing mine in, and I do not recommend doing that next time. If I could do it all over again, I would use a real press, but this is what I got to work, and it was a 10-inch C-clamp at Home Depot, and it was like $10 or $12. But yeah, if I had to do this all over again, I would use a real press for these. And if you're going to upgrade to polyurethane bushings, then you really don't have to worry about this because they're like a split bushing. But if you're going to go original like I did, then you're going to need to use a big C-clamp or a press. Again, I found the best luck with the C-clamp, but there's a million other different ways that you can do this. And to finish it off, I used a bigger socket, like a deep impact socket that won't interfere with the bushing, and put it on the other side so that it would act like a cup and the entire bushing could get pressed in and it wouldn't interfere. And I used the same process of a big C-clamp, and I actually stacked wrenches. I did all sorts of crazy stuff to put in the subframe bushings. I wouldn't recommend doing yourself, but if you have access to a press, use it. But if you don't, you can do the way I did with the big C-clamp and just hope for the best. And after messing around with the bushing for probably about 20 minutes, the entire thing is pressed back in, and I just cleaned up the area and just got a lot of the extra grease off of it, and I moved on to the next side. And don't forget to throw in that washer that you hit off with the hammer before in the vise. Don't forget to put that back onto the top of the bushing. And then you can start to tighten back up the trailing arms onto the subframe. If they're not 100% lined up here, it's okay, because when you tighten down that bolt, it'll start to press it back together and line them back up. And to finish up, I took off the diff cover and drained all the fluid out of it. And then I had a shop press on the differential bushing. Believe me, you can't use a C-clamp for that. You have to have it pressed on with a shop or somebody with a press. And then I just tightened up the whole thing and put a nice form of gasket on it. And that was it for it. And that was it. And after that, I put the whole thing back together, and the car rode amazingly. Towards the spring and summer, I will get you a good riding video of how the car is and how it was before. But I gotta say, this is probably one of the best redo, modification, refresh I've ever done to this car. So if you're scared to do it, do it. Don't be scared, because the ride quality after is amazing. Anyway, thank you for watching E30 Source. This is probably the longest video I've ever done, and enjoy and stay tuned for more.